Hello everybody, so just doing a quick video overview on pre-revolutionary France. So looking to describe the social, political, and economic problems that existed in France before the revolution began. So here, just a quick little overview. Political revolutions are those that have to do with changing of the government, usually an overthrow of one government to replace it with another. Most political revolutions are violent. Non-political revolutions have to do with change in technology or change in ideas that and effects of that change. So one example that we can give is the scientific revolution is a non-political revolution. It changes ideas, the way people act and think and view the world, but it's not inherently violent and doesn't lead to any major government changes as a result of the scientific revolution. So when we look at the French Revolution, 1789, 1799, we'll look at a timeline in just a moment. Political revolution during which the lower and middle class in France were frustrated over social, economic, and political problems in the country. They were inspired by Enlightenment ideas, and they overthrew King Louis XVI and tried to institute a more democratic government. So we look at our timeline here of all of the events that are happening around the world. So Age of Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Protestant Reformation, the Age of Absolutism, and then we see this dramatic shift with all these new ideas that have come from these non-political revolutions, and then we lead to the Age of Revolution, where these are more political revolutions inspired by these non-political revolutions to change their government. So beginning with the American Revolution, followed by the French Revolution, and then we'll talk about the Haitian Revolution and the subsequent revolutions in South and Latin America as a result. So we have four main stages in the French Revolution. We're going to look at each of them individually throughout this unit. So we start with the first stage, the National Assembly, 1789 to 1791. We'll then go on to the radical stage of the revolution, stage 2. We'll look at the Directory, the third stage, and then we will consider the Age of Napoleon to be the fourth stage of the French Revolution for our conversations. So when we are looking at France before the revolution begins, it's important for us to understand the estate system. This was a class structure in France before the revolution began. Though feudalism was no longer the organizing force in Europe, the same groups that held power during the Middle Ages still had control over society. So we see here very clearly three groups, and then we have the visual to really help us understand the quantity of people going in each group. So we have the first estate is the clergy. They make up 1% of the population and they own 10% of the land. The nobles were 2% of the population and they own 25% of the land. And the third estate was everybody else, middle class, peasants, city workers. They're 97% of the population and they own 65% of the land. So to build upon that, we have two great visuals to look at. So the first being this set of pie charts, so the one with the population and the land ownership, but then we have the third pie chart that shows the government taxation, where the third estate is paying 100% of the taxes. And if we were looking at this, the third estate is not going to be the most wealthy estate. They're not going to have the most wealth in society, but yet they are paying all of the taxes. And then we have this image down here, this political cartoon. You should hope this game will be over soon, 1788. So we have the third estate carrying the first and second estate on his back. He's hunched over. He's not wearing the best clothing. He looks kind of ragged and old. Meanwhile, the clergy and the nobles are well dressed. They look great. They have plump faces, right? They are doing just fine here in France before the revolution begins. And now we turn our attention to King Louis XVI. So King Louis XVI was an absolute ruler. He had total control. He said that he had the divine right to rule, so he was chosen by God. He could declare war, make peace, he levied taxes, and spent the people's money however he wanted. And many times it was to renovate the Palace of Versailles, to continue to live his lavish lifestyle. He controlled the expression of thought, strict censorship of speech and press. He would send sealed letters, which were blank arrest warrants. He could imprison anyone without reason, without trial, for an indefinite period of time. And he lived in the magnificent Palace of Versailles, completely oblivious to the rising tide of popular dissent. So Louis XVI is living a very comfortable lifestyle right now, and is not really aware that the third estate is growing angrier and angrier with him. One point that I like to take a look at is this excerpt from the Travels in France, 1792, by Arthur Young. He stumbles upon a woman, and I really like to point out this quote right here. This woman, at no great distance, might have been taken for 60 or 70. Her figure was so bent, and her face was so furrowed, wrinkled, and hardened by labor. But she said she was only 28. It's a really important quote to focus on to show us how bad things were for the Third Estate. That this man who was traveling could have been off by decades on how old this woman was because of the hard life that she lived and the experiences that she had. So we're looking here, the Third Estate is growing very angry with the First and Second Estate, but especially King Louis XVI, as they are seeing themselves suffering, they are seeing themselves being taken advantage of. And when we look at a very specific moment, when there is a bad harvest season, we have a harsh winter that leads to a lack of product to be produced, and we don't have enough food to make bread, and the price of bread rises. The Third Estate gets, as we said, hangry. And that leads to really that spark, that catalyst moment where the Third Estate has had enough of this ill treatment, and they use those Enlightenment ideas to inspire their revolution. So this is pre-revolutionary France. The estate system is the key thing to focus on here. Also, the powers that King Louis XVI had. So I hope this little overview helped.